The cave swallowed him whole as he stepped into its mouth, leaving the fury of the storm behind him. The pounding of the rain faded as though the world outside had been cut away, and he now walked into another realm. The air was damp, heavy, and filled with the smell of stone and moss. A faint dripping sound echoed deeper within each drop, stretching the silence. Like a whisper he could not yet understand. His boots sank slightly into the mud at the entrance, then crunched against loose stones as he pressed forward. He held a lantern, its flame trembling with every step, casting long shadows against the jagged walls. The light danced across shapes that seemed alive for an instant, before fading back into darkness. The walls of the cave were rough, scarred with strange lines that almost looked carved, as though hands long forgotten had marked their stories. Here he stopped once, raising the lantern higher. The flicker revealed streaks of minerals shining faintly, as if the cave itself had veins of hidden fire. He blinked and lowered the light, feeling suddenly that the cave had eyes and it was watching him. A gust of wind whispered through the tunnel, though there was no opening to explain its source. The sound sent a shiver crawling down his spine. He had wandered far from the beaten path, far from the trail that others dared to follow. The storm outside had driven him here, but now that he stood within the cave, he felt as though the storm had only been a trick to bring him to this place. He told himself he was seeking shelter, yet a voice in the back of his mind whispered that the cave had been waiting. The deeper he moved, the more the world outside seemed unreal. The silence pressed in closer, so close that he could hear his own breath, ragged and uneasy. The dripping water sounded louder than it should, echoing endlessly as if the cave was amplifying every sound. His pulse thudded in his ears. He tried to steady his breathing, but every step made him feel smaller and smaller, until he was a trespasser walking in the belly of some sleeping beast. The lantern glow revealed an opening ahead, wider than the narrow path he had been crawling through. He hesitated, his hand tightening on the handle of the lantern, as though the flame inside was his last tether to safety. Then he stepped forward into the chamber. The ground leveled out, smooth as though it had been worn by centuries of flowing water. The ceiling rose high into the dark, disappearing from the reach of his light, and in the center of it all there lay a pool. It was no ordinary pool. Its surface was still as glass, reflecting the faint glow of his lantern. Yet in the reflection he saw more than just himself. The water shimmered faintly with colors not of firelight but of something deeper, something alive. A pale glow rippled across it, as if stars had fallen into the cave and were now floating beneath the surface. He froze, unable to look away. The air here felt different, heavier, charged with a strange energy that made the hair on his arms rise. He stepped closer, each movement slow, careful, drawn not by choice but by something stronger. Thirst in his throat grew fierce as he stared at the water. His lips were dry, his body weary from the storm above and the journey down. But this was more than thirst. This was a pull, a need that burrowed into his chest, telling him to kneel, to drink, to claim what the pool offered. He felt a pang of fear, but fear mixed with wonder, with awe, and with a longing he could not fight. He crouched at the edge, the lantern beside him casting dim ripples of light across the stone walls. He leaned closer, the surface of the water trembling as his breath touched it, and in that fragile moment the cave grew so silent it was as though it was holding its breath with him. His lantern shook with his hand as he moved closer to the center of the chamber, and the pool shimmered with a strange beauty that both invited and warned him. The light flickered across the surface, and for a moment it looked as though the water was breathing, as if the pool itself inhaled and exhaled in rhythm with his own chest. He crouched lower, drawn forward by a pull that felt older than the stone around him. He dipped his fingers into the water, and a chill shot up his arm, sharper than winter air and colder than the deepest snow. Yet the cold did not sting, it lingered instead, like a secret pressing against his skin. The pool stretched wider than he first thought, its edges dissolving into shadow where the lantern light failed to reach. The glow within the water seemed to pulse faintly, as though something alive moved just beneath the surface. He leaned forward, raising the lantern higher, trying to pierce the veil of darkness and see what might dwell within. The flame sputtered, almost as though the cave itself sought to smother it. The shadows thickened, curling upward along the walls in shapes that twisted and bent, as if they were alive. He glanced away quickly, his breath catching in his throat. His own shadow lay long across the stone floor, but for a brief heartbeat he thought he saw another figure moving beside it, a taller figure, lean and crooked, bending as though whispering close to his ear. He turned sharply, yet nothing stood behind him, only the hollow expanse of the cavern and the faint whisper of dripping water. He steadied his breath and told himself he was imagining things, that his mind played tricks in the half-light. Still, The pool called to him, his throat burned with thirst, and the weight of the journey pressed upon him. Every muscle ached, and his skin felt as though it begged for relief. The storm had driven him into this cave, but now the storm was gone and forgotten. The only thing real was the water glimmering before him. A thought crept into his mind, soft and persuasive, that no harm could come from drinking. No hand would ever know. No eye would ever see. It was only him and the water. He lowered himself further, kneeling at the edge. The surface trembled slightly as his reflection appeared. The lantern light caught his face, yet in the water his eyes seemed brighter, sharper, almost glowing, with a hue that he could not recognize. He blinked and leaned closer, and in that instant the reflection shifted. The features blurred, then cleared again, yet something in the shape of the mouth seemed not his own. Something smiled faintly and vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He jerked back, and his lantern shook, spilling more light across the chamber, but the water was calm once more. His heart raced, but the thirst was stronger. The silence of the cave pressed against him, making his own breath seem loud enough to shatter stone. He cupped his hands and dipped them into the pool. The cold rushed between his fingers like liquid ice. He raised the handful of water to his lips, his hands trembling as the droplets fell and struck the ground with tiny echoes. He drank, and the cold slid down his throat, filling him with a sharpness that stabbed into his chest. The chamber seemed to tighten around him, as if the cave itself leaned closer. He coughed once, but the chill spread deeper, curling through his veins, reaching his heart, and sinking further still. It was not like drinking water, it was like swallowing the night itself. A night filled with voices, too distant to understand, yet near enough to feel. His vision blurred and steadied, and the glow from the pool brightened. As though pleased, he wiped his mouth and drew a breath, but the air itself had changed, heavier and denser, until he could almost taste the stone and the darkness. He tried to rise, but his legs felt strange, as though they belonged to someone else. His heartbeat thundered, echoing in his ears louder and louder, until it drowned the dripping of the cave. He gripped the lantern tightly, as if it could anchor him, but the flames swayed, erratic and weak. He blinked, and for a moment the chamber looked different, taller, deeper, the shadows thicker and alive. The pool shimmered more brightly now, casting pale light across his face, and he felt the certainty that the cave was not empty and he was not alone. He knelt still at the edge of the pool, his breath slow and uneven, his body trembling with a chill that was no longer simple cold, but something deeper, something that did not belong to him. His eyes scanned the chamber, searching for movement, and for a moment all was still, but the silence was too perfect, too heavy to be trusted. The air felt alive, pressing against his skin like unseen hands, and he realized he could hear more than the dripping water now. There was a faint rhythm beneath, it steady and slow like the heartbeat of the cave itself. He rose unsteadily, clutching his lantern, yet the light seemed weaker than before, as though the flame was cowering from whatever filled the air. The walls glistened faintly with moisture, but the shine bent strangely, not simply reflecting light but twisting it so that shapes moved where there should have been none. He took a step back, and his boots scraped against the stone, sending an echo that stretched far too long and too far away, as if it had reached into another place entirely. His chest tightened and his throat burned with the lingering chill of the water. The taste of it still clung to his tongue, sharp, metallic, like blood and stone mixed together. He tried to shake the feeling, but with every heartbeat the sensation deepened, spreading outward until his fingers tingled, and his vision sharpened. He could see the lines in the rock clearer than the lantern allowed, every crack, every mark, etched with strange clarity. He blinked and closed his eyes, but when he opened them again the clarity remained. Then he heard it. The sound was so soft it could have been the brush of a breath, yet it slid into his ear, clear as words. A whisper, "You do not know what you have become." His blood froze and the lantern rattled in his grip. The words had not come from within his mind, they had weight, they had sound though. No one stood near him. He spun around, the light slicing across the chamber walls, but there was nothing, only his own shadow bending long across the floor. His voice caught in his throat. He tried to speak, to demand who was there, but only a rasp came out, weak and uncertain. The whisper lingered, echoing inside him, as though the stone itself had spoken it. His heart raced and every instinct told him to flee, yet his legs rooted themselves to the ground. He felt eyes on him, eyes he could not see, watching from corners where the lantern could not reach. He turned again, raising the light high, but the flame sputtered, dim and fragile, as though smothered by the darkness. Shadows stretched unnaturally tall against the walls, bending at wrong angles, some curling as though they reached for him. He blinked hard and rubbed at his eyes, yet when he looked again, the shadows still moved. His pulse hammered. He tried to breathe steady, but each inhale felt thick and heavy. The whisper had been real. He could not deny it. The cave was not silent, it was speaking, and it was not finished. The pool shimmered once more. Drawing his gaze against his will, the reflection on its surface rippled. Though the air above it was still, he leaned closer, unable to stop himself, and saw his face staring back but altered. The eyes glowed faintly with pale light, the mouth curled into a faint smile that he did not wear. He recoiled in shock, and nearly dropped the lantern, but the reflection faded back to normal, calm and human, as though mocking him for noticing. The words echoed again, softer, yet closer. You do not know what you have become. He staggered back, his boot sliding on the slick stone, nearly losing his balance. The chamber seemed to close in the shadows, thickening with every breath. He could feel something inside him shifting, not pain exactly, but change. A new rhythm pulsed within his veins, not his own yet now inseparable from him. He clutched his chest, his breath ragged, his body trembling, as though it could not decide if it was still his. At first nothing happened. After the whisper faded, only the sound of his breathing filled the chamber, shallow and uneven as he gripped the lantern with both hands. His pulse thundered in his ears, and he stared at the pool, waiting for another ripple, waiting for another glimpse of the reflection that did not belong to him. But the water was still calm and quiet, as though nothing had disturbed it. He tried to steady himself, to push away the thought that the voice had been real, and that it had entered him. Yet the more he tried, the stronger the thought became, until it was no longer a thought but a truth. He turned his head quickly, scanning the chamber again. The shadows still clung to the walls, but now they looked different, softer yet heavier, as if the darkness itself had weight. They seemed to lean closer, stretching toward him with shapes that did not match the jagged rocks. He lifted the lantern higher, but the flame faltered again, as though it too feared what it revealed. His throat tightened. He whispered a soundless plea for light, for warmth, for something familiar. But the cave answered with silence. Then the change began. He felt it first in his chest, where the water had burned cold before, but now it throbbed with warmth, a heat that spread outward in pulses. His heartbeat no longer felt like his own. It was faster, then slower, then steady again, as if it were sinking with something older. The warmth slid into his arms and legs, making the muscles tighten, as though they had been starved and were now fed. The ache of his long journey was gone, yet in its place grew a strength that felt unnatural, heavy but intoxicating. He looked at his hands in the glow of the lantern, and saw his skin flush with strange color, his veins faintly lit beneath the surface, pulsing with light that should not exist. He rubbed at them frantically, but the glow remained, and the warmth surged higher, crawling into his head, filling his vision with sharpness that bordered on pain. The cave became too clear, too detailed. He could see the ridges of stone like teeth, the grains of sand on the floor, the faint movement of the water, as if it were breathing with him. Fear clawed at him, yet wonder followed close behind. He felt alive, more alive than he ever had before, and with that came dread, for he knew this was not his own vitality. It was borrowed, stolen, or given by something beyond him. He clenched his jaw and tried to resist the surge, but each breath drew more of it deeper. Inside, he staggered backward, but the chamber did not feel wider. It felt smaller, as though the shadows closed ranks around him. Sound came then, not the whisper, but a faint hum that vibrated through the stone and into his bones. It was not words, but it carried meaning, a summons, a reminder that he was no longer who he had been. The hum grew louder, pressing into his skull until his teeth ached, and his vision blurred. He dropped to one knee, gasping for breath, as the lantern slipped from his hand, clattering against the ground. The flame wavered and steadied again, casting long, crawling shadows that seemed to move with the hum. He forced his eyes open, and looked toward the pool. It glowed brighter than before, the shimmer rising from beneath the surface, as though something within it had awakened. The water no longer seemed still. It churned, with faint currents, though no hand had touched it. His reflection stared back at him, but it was not him, not anymore. The eyes shone pale and merciless, the mouth curled with a knowing grin, as if the figure in the water understood exactly what he was becoming. Then he heard it again, the whisper, soft yet clear, weaving through the silence of the chamber, as though it had always been there waiting for him. The words did not strike his ears, they slipped directly into his skull, brushing against his thoughts, and settling inside. You do not know what you have become. The tone was not mocking nor kind, it was ancient and patient, filled with a weight that pressed down upon him heavier than stone. He clutched his head, trying to drive the voice out, but the more he resisted, the louder it became. He forced himself to his feet, his legs trembling yet stronger than they should have been. The lantern flickered weak on the ground, yet he no longer needed its light. His vision pierced through the darkness more sharply than fire ever could. he could see the wet sheen of the rocks far above the delicate strands of moss clinging to cracks, even the tiny ripples in the pool that moved though the air remained still. He staggered back, horrified by this new sight but fascinated. At the same time he felt as though the cave was no longer hiding anything from him. The whisper came again, closer this time, almost at his shoulder, as though a mouth hovered just behind his ear. "You do not know what you have become." He spun quickly, expecting a figure, expecting flesh and bone, but nothing was there. Only shadows stretching and curling along the walls, their shapes bending into forms that almost resembled faces. Their mouths moved silently in rhythm with the voice, and their eyes, hollow and deep, seemed to watch him without blinking. He stumbled back, and his heels struck the edge of the pool, sending a ripple racing across its glowing surface. The air thickened with each passing moment, pressing into his chest until every breath felt like inhaling smoke. His heart pounded, but it was not his rhythm anymore. It was too strong, too steady, too deliberate. His own pulse had been replaced by something greater, something not his own. He pressed a hand against his chest and felt the beat resonate not only in his body but in the stone floor beneath him, as if the cave itself shared his heart. He gasped in horror, but the sound came out low and distorted, carrying an echo that did not belong to him. Shadows stirred at the sound, twisting tighter along the walls, as though answering a signal. The voice whispered once more, not words this time, but a soft hum that crawled into his bones and made his teeth ache. The hum grew until it filled the chamber, vibrating the air and shattering the silence. He staggered forward, clutching his head, his vision trembling as though the world was rippling around him. The pool brightened, its glow spilling onto the walls and ceiling, casting the chamber in pale, ghostly light. His reflection appeared again, clear upon the surface, yet this time it did not mimic his movements. He raised his hand, but the figure in the water did not follow. Instead, it smiled with sharp calmness, its eyes gleaming like pale fire. His knees buckled and he fell to the ground, unable to look away. The voice wrapped around him again. "You do not know what you have become, but soon you will." The words sank into him, filling the hollow spaces left by fear, replacing them with something darker and stronger, something that pulsed with certainty. The cave moaned softly as if a live stone grinding against stone in distant echoes. His hands shook, his breath ragged, yet beneath his terror a strange exhilaration grew, a sense of power clawing up from within. He wanted to deny it, yet his body no longer obeyed. He was changing, and the cave bore witness, shadows bending closer, whispers thickening around him, as if all had been waiting for this moment. His heart pounded with the weight of the voice still echoing through him, yet his chest no longer felt like his own. The beat inside was deeper, resonant, as if it belonged to something vast and ancient. He staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady, though filled with a strength that defied exhaustion. The glow of the pool flared brighter, spilling across the stone walls, until the entire chamber seemed alive with trembling light. The shadows shifted restlessly, no longer flat against the rock, but stretching forward, bending like limbs reaching for him. He tried to move back, but his body hesitated as though some unseen tether bound him to the pool. The water rippled again, though he had not touched it, and shapes stirred beneath the surface. He could not make them out clearly, but their movements were deliberate, slow, powerful. He leaned forward against his will, his breath shallow as the glow from the depths flickered like eyes staring upward, eyes that saw him more completely than he could ever see himself. He pulled back with a cry, but the connection remained, pressing into his mind with the weight of knowledge he could not understand. The whisper returned, softer now, yet more dangerous, for it carried not just words but intent. "You do not know what you have become." The phrase twisted in his skull, each syllable layered with meaning, until it felt like three voices spoke at once. One cruel, one patient, one neither human nor kind. His lantern on the ground flickered and went out, yet the chamber did not plunge into darkness. His own body gave off faint light, his veins glowing beneath the skin like threads of fire coursing through him. He stared at his hands in horror, the glow pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat that no longer felt human. The shadows reacted to the glow, curling closer, drawn as if by hunger. They reached along the floor and ceiling, stretching toward him. Their forms bent into shapes with faces hollow-eyed and twisted, their mouths moving silently, as if echoing prayers to some hidden god. He stumbled back, but they followed, sliding with unnatural grace, never breaking their focus on him. He raised his hand to ward them off, and the glow from his veins surged brighter, bursting outward in a sudden flash. The shadows recoiled, writhing against the walls, as if burned. He froze, stunned by what he had done. The light within him answered his fear, yet it did not feel like his own strength. It felt borrowed, it felt given. He lowered his hand slowly, trembling as the glow faded, but the chamber remained altered. The air hummed with energy, his skin prickled, and the pool shimmered with satisfaction as though it had been waiting for this very act. The voice whispered again, but this time it carried a note of triumph. "You are beginning to see." He clutched his chest, his breath ragged, his thoughts torn between terror and fascination. He had drunk from the pool, and now the cave had marked him. The reflection in the water no longer showed a man, but something sharper, something carved from light and shadow, with eyes that pierced and a mouth that smiled with ancient calm. He fell to his knees, gripping the stone floor, his mind reeling as the truth pressed closer, yet refused to reveal itself. Fully, he knew one thing with certainty: whatever he was before, he was no longer that now. Fear clung to him, yet beneath it pulsed a current of power that refused to be denied. His breath came hard and uneven, his chest rising with a rhythm no longer his own. The chamber stretched around him, vast and endless. Though he knew the stone had not moved, the shadows pressed closer, circling with slow, deliberate grace. Their forms rose higher, taking shape into figures that almost resembled people, though twisted and stretched as if memory itself had forgotten what a person should look like. Their mouths opened silently, but he felt the sound in his bones, a vibration that crawled through him until his skin burned. He raised his hand again, trembling with dread, yet when the veins within him pulsed, the glow answered with a force he could not control. The chamber flared with light, and the shadows bent back, hissing without sound, writhing against the walls as if scorched. He staggered in shock, staring at his own arm, alive with fire and power. He could not comprehend. The fear inside him deepened, but so too did wonder. What had he become? What was waking inside him? The voice had warned him, yet given no answer, only the certainty that he was no longer who he thought he was. The shadows did not retreat. Far they pressed against the walls, seething and restless, their faces melted and reformed, their mouths twisting into whispers without breath. His ears filled with them, though no sound should exist, a chorus of murmurs, all speaking at once, tangled words that clawed into his mind. He pressed his hands to his head, his knees buckling as the flood of whispers crashed through him. They spoke not in language he knew, yet he understood fragments of hunger, fragments of promise, fragments of eternity, waiting to be claimed. The pool brightened with each passing moment, its glow casting long pale streaks across the chamber. The water stirred violently now, no longer calm. Its surface broke with ripples, as though something beneath was rising closer to him. He stumbled toward it without meaning to, drawn by a gravity stronger than fear. His reflection appeared, but it did not mimic him this time. It raised its hand when he stayed still. It leaned forward when he tried to pull away. Its eyes burned brighter than before, filled with certainty and knowledge he did not possess. The sight made his stomach twist, yet his chest ached with longing to know what those eyes already understood. The whisper returned, this time more solid, closer to words formed directly for him. "You are becoming." The voice carried no emotion, no warmth, no cruelty, only inevitability. He shook his head and whispered back a broken denial, though his voice cracked and echoed strange, no longer the sound he had always known. The reflection smiled wider, as if amused by his refusal. The pool shimmered brighter, spilling light across the shadows, and for the first time he saw them clearly, not just shapes of darkness, but countless faces, hollow and ancient, all staring at him, waiting. His legs weakened and he sank to the ground, trembling. The whispers did not stop. They swirled inside his skull, threading themselves into his very thoughts, until he could no longer tell which were his own, and which belonged to the cave. He wanted to escape, yet he could not move. He wanted to scream, yet the sound stuck in his throat. The truth pressed closer, relentless. He had changed, and the chamber knew it, the shadows knew it, the pool knew it, only he still clung to denial. The whispers wrapped around him, tighter, filling the chamber with a storm of sound that carried no breath, yet weighed on him heavier than stone. He pressed his palms to the ground, trying to steady himself, but the rock beneath his fingers pulsed, as if it shared the same rhythm as his chest. Every beat throbbed through him, echoing into the walls, until the entire cave seemed alive. His breath came ragged, each inhale thick like smoke, and each exhale trembling as though the air resisted leaving his lungs. He closed his eyes, but the voices did not fade. They grew sharper until a single thread rose above them. All the whisper returned, clearer than before. "You are no longer bound." The words struck like a knife, soft yet cutting through every part of him. His body shivered, not from cold but from the surge of heat that followed. Each vein burned with light, until it spilled faintly beneath his skin. His hands glowed brighter now, illuminating the chamber more than the lost lantern ever could. The shadows recoiled at first, yet they did not flee. They gathered closer, watching, pressing against the edges of the glow like predators testing the strength of Akaji, forced himself to stand though his legs trembled. His reflection in the pool rose with him, yet it did not move the same. It tilted its head, its eyes burning pale, its mouth curling with quiet certainty. He whispered to himself, desperate to hold on to the sound of his own voice, "I am still me, I am still human," but the reflection smiled wider, as if the words meant nothing, as if they were already untruth. Pool stirred violently now, waves rolling across its surface, though no hand touched it. The glow rose higher, spilling mist that coiled into the chamber. The mist carried shapes within, fleeting faces, and twisted forms that dissolved before his eyes, yet each one looked upon him with recognition, as though they had been waiting for this moment, as though they had always known he would come. His chest tightened. As the truth pressed closer, the cave had not been shelter, it had been a summons. The whisper deepened its tone, steady and final. "You are chosen, you are remade." His heart hammered against his ribs, his throat closing in panic. He staggered backward, but the shadows moved with him, circling him, until escape was only illusion. Their faces shifted constantly, ancient sorrow, ancient hunger, ancient patience, staring with eyes that burned. Empty, the mist thickened around his legs, climbing higher, until it wrapped his chest and shoulders cold and heavy. Like chains he tried to struggle, but each movement only sank him deeper into the weight. His vision blurred, but within the blur he saw more than before. The chamber seemed larger, endless, a cathedral of stone and shadow. The pool stretched deeper, its glow infinite, as if it touched a world beyond the rock and water. His reflection looked back, no longer human at all, but something ancient crowned in shadow, its hands raised in command. The sight made his breath catch, yet his body leaned forward, drawn helplessly closer, drawn to the truth that waited just beyond his denial. The voices fell silent all at once, leaving only his pulse and the faint sound of the pool. The silence was worse than the whispers, heavy, final, demanding the next word would decide everything. The next breath would mark what he truly was. The silence pressed down on him, thicker than the voices had ever been. He stood trembling, his body burning with light that pulsed in rhythm with the pool. His chest rose and fell uneven, his breath sounding loud enough to shake the chamber. He stared at the surface of the water, waiting for it to settle, yet the glow deepened until it was like staring into the heart of a star. The mist around him tightened, cold and heavy, wrapping his body in coils that felt alive. He tried to move, but the stone beneath his feet clung to him as though the cave itself refused to let him leave. Then the reflection returned, brighter, sharper, clearer than ever. Before, it no longer looked like him at all. Its face was stretched with calm power, its eyes burning, pale with endless fire, its mouth curled into a smile that knew every secret and every fear. Its hand reached upward from the surface, though no ripple followed. As if the water itself had become glass, he stepped back in terror, but his body betrayed him, leaning closer, as if drawn by a gravity he could not resist. His heart thudded hard, each beat stronger, more alien. The whisper came again. "You are what was waiting." The words were not spoken into his ear, they rose from every corner of the cave, vibrating through the walls, pressing into his chest until he could no longer breathe. He tried to deny it, tried to shout his name into the chamber, to hold on to what little of himself remained, but the sound that left his mouth was not his own. It echoed strange, low, and resonant, like stone grinding against stone. His voice was gone, stolen or transformed into something he could not claim. The shadows surged forward, closing around him, their faces twisted into countless forms, old and broken. Some human, some not. Their mouths opened wide, yet no sound came. Instead they bowed as though in reverence, as though kneeling before a figure they had always awaited. He shook his head in horror, but the sight filled him with an unsettling rush of Powell. A part of him wanted to step forward, to accept what they offered, to stand among them, not as prey but as master. The pool flared once more, blinding white, and for a moment he could see everything, not only the cave but beyond. He saw endless caverns stretching deep beneath the world, rivers of shadow flowing like veins, and eyes watching from the dark places between. The vision seared his mind, yet it did not fade. It carved itself into him, permanent, undeniable. He staggered under the weight of it, gasping as though drowning. Though no water touched his lips, the reflection spoke at last, its mouth moving with the whisper, "You are no Longer man, you are chosen, you are the vessel. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground, his hands striking the cold stone. The glow in his veins burned brighter, spreading across his skin until his whole body lit the chamber. He cried out, yet the cry was not pain, it was release, a sound that echoed with power, not his own. The shadows pressed, closed, their hollow eyes fixed upon him, their bowed heads trembling, as if waiting for command. The pool stilled at last, its glow, steady, calm, final. His reflection smiled wider, and then it was no longer just a reflection, it was him staring back from within his own eyes. He lowered his head, trembling, his breath shallow, and the whisper returned one last time, soft and certain. You have no idea what you have become.